Hi everyone. This is a big moment for us here. We've spent a lot of time working on different components and testing them. And now that we've tested them pretty extensively, although we could do a lot more testing, we're confident that the components work. And so what that means is that we're ready to start using the components in our project and putting all the pieces together to see how our API is going to do CRUD operations on the genres table of the database. So what I'm looking at here is the genre controller file that we started, and we kind of just left placeholder responses in here, so just something to get up and running. If you want to review how this controller file works, is we have to really look at the routes first. Actually, what I'm going to do is go ahead and look at app.js first, and we can kind of trace the routes and figure out how all of our code leads to the controller file here. So if I look in app.js, what we did here is we, for any routes that start with /genre, we are going to send those to the middleware functions that we put inside of the genre routes file. So this is kind of a shortcut trick, but we're just importing the genre routes file right here and passing what it returns as the parameter into app.use to set up these middleware functions for any route that starts with /genres. Okay, so let's take a look at the genre routes file now. So this was always very odd to me at first, but what's recommended is that you define your routes, and this is something we've been doing all along, but what was odd to me is that instead of putting an arrow function right in here, an anonymous arrow function for each route, what's recommended is that you create a separate function in a controller file, and you just use the name of that function instead of an anonymous function. Okay, now that seems strange to me. Like, what's the benefit of splitting the code apart like this? But apparently the idea is that you want your route file to be real simple so that you can come in here and just look at the routes and see what the routes are without having to dig through a bunch of code. Okay, so instead of putting our middleware functions or our route handler functions right here in these spots, what we did is we created these middleware functions in a controller file. We're importing those functions from the controller file. There's the import statement, importing all of the functions, and then we're just plugging them into the proper route right here. Okay, so that takes us to this controller file, which is right here. Okay, and here's where we left it. So they're just dummy responses right now, and they're not actually returning the data that we need them to return. So in this video, we are going to put in the right code for all of these middleware functions. Okay, now I've got tests that you can use, and I put them on the web page that this video is on. And so to get started, let's create the test file and we'll take a look at it. Okay, so right click on the tests folder in your project and choose new file. And we're going to create a file called genre.api.test.js. genre.api.test.js. Okay, and now I've just copied the code from the web page that has this video on it, and I can go ahead and paste it in here, and we'll just have a quick look at this real quick. Okay, now, whoops, what did I do here? I might have copied a little too much here. There we go. Oh, I copied the whole thing. Let me try that again. Okay, there we go. I had a copy paste error. So anyways, this is the code that should paste into the API test.js file here. Now what I did is I did like what I did in the previous video, where we're going to run these like tests one function at a time. So first of all, just to review this here, we're importing the super test package, and that's what we can use that will start our app. So the super test package, which we're storing in this variable called request, that's the package that's going to launch our app and run it, and then it's going to run the tests against the app. Okay, so we're importing super tests here, And then here's where we set that up. Look at what we're doing here. We're taking that request object that we imported and we're calling the agent method on it. And then what we're passing into it is our application. So there is our app. And if you want to see what that is, it's right here. We imported it. So this is our app that has all of the code in it except the code that starts the server. So remember, we separated that code out into a separate file called server.js. And the reason why we did that is because we need to have just the app without the code that starts the app so that we can pass it into the super test agent method right here. And it's going to start the app for us, puts it on some port. I don't know exactly how it works, but it starts the app for us, and then it runs our unit tests. Okay, so here let's take a look at the tests that we're using for this route. So here, there's our first set. Oh, I'm sorry. No, we're here. It's actually this route right here, the route to get all genres. Okay, so I only put one test in there. We probably need more than that, but here's what I have in there. We just want to make sure that when you make a request to get all genres, that it returns the proper data. So what I'm looking for here is where we make the request. So it works kind of like an Express application object where you can call get or post or put or whatever. But here's where we make the request to our API for the /genres route. Okay, and then we wait for the response, and then we can analyze the response and run tests on it. So here, if we make a request to /genres, we take the response and we can check its status. So its status should be 200. That would tell us that it's returning a successful response. And we also want to check the body of the response. It's going to assume that everything is returned as JSON, and then it will parse the JSON and into an array. And we want to make sure that what we get is in the body is an array with a length that's going to be greater than 24. Okay, now remember we talked about how these tests run asynchronously, so this seems kind of like a weird test. We don't know when our test is going to run that inserts another row into the test database. So I kind of had to get a little bit weird with these tests to make sure that other tests don't cause these to fail, and that these tests don't cause other tests to fail, because we can't guarantee the order in which they run. Okay, so there we go. I just kept it pretty simple. One simple test for the route that's supposed to get all genres. Okay, go ahead and save that. And now let's put the code in place so that we can run this test and see if it passes. So go back over to your controller file, and we're gonna, you can go ahead and comment out what we have inside that get all handler, and we're gonna replace it with the real code here. But before we do, we're gonna have to import a few things right here. We're gonna be making use of the genre data service. So we need to import the functions from the genre data service. So here we'll go const and then an object, and what we want to set that. I'll fill in the curly braces in just a second here, but what we want to import is from this file right here, genre data service. Okay, why don't we just go ahead and import all of the functions that we need right now so that we don't have to do it later. So inside those curly braces, I'm going to add the get all genres, the get genre by ID, the insert genre, the update genre, and also the delete genre. Okay, now we're fairly confident that these all work because we tested them already, and that's how we want to go about development. You build your components, you test them, and then you start assembling your components into these apps right here. That's component-based design. All right, so let's move back down to our first route, the get all handler. So I'm going to put my cursor. Oh wait, there is something else we need to import. We're going to be making use of the genre model object in here too. So I do want to import the genre model class, like so. Genre model. Okay, so we'll be creating genre models here. All right, So now let's go down to our first route handler. And right here, we're going to start off with a try-catch block. So go ahead, and this is going to be a common thing that we do throughout all of these route handlers, all these controller route handlers. So go ahead and set that up. And I called it error inside the catch parentheses there. You can call it E. Well, why don't we all stick to the same thing here? So now this is the way this is going to work, is we're going to put the code that we want to run in the try block. If there's an error, we want to catch it. And what we want to do is send it to our error handler that we defined in app.js. So here inside the catch block, to do that, we can call the next function. So, and if we pass an error into that next function, it's going to go to our error handler function that we define in app.js. So this is how we're redirecting errors into that error handler here. So we want to go next, and then we're going to take the error that gets thrown and just pass that into the next route handler function. Express is going to look at this, and if it sees that this parameter is an error object, it's going to automatically go to the error handler. Okay, so that's how we're going to deal with errors. And then our error handler function in app.js can do something graceful depending on the environment. So for example, well, let's take a look at it real quick and see how we have that set up. So if I go to app.js here is our error handler. So what we're doing here is now I kind of came up with this right here. What we want to do is we can attach a status code property to the error object. And so it can look for that status code. You'll see that. We'll be doing that at some point. So it can look for the status code that we want to send in the response. If it doesn't have that status code property attached to it, we're just going to default to an error code of 500, which means that there was some problem on the server. Okay. And now what we're going to do here is if we're on production, all we want to do is send bare minimum information, because you never want to share details of an error on your live server. So what we do here is we're going to send a status code of whatever we set this variable to, and then we're going to send a message, a really vague message, there has been an error. Okay. But if we're not in the production environment, then we want to get all the details we can out of the error. So here we'll send the status code, and then we're going to send a JSON response that includes as many error details as we can right here. Okay, so there's a quick review of how our error handler is happening. And back here in the controller is an example of how we can end up in the error handler by calling next and passing in an error object. Okay, so here in the try block, let's go ahead and what we want to do is get all the genres. That's what this route is supposed to do, or that's what this controller is supposed to do. So I can go const all genres like that, and we'll set that equal to await, and we want to call get all genres. That's our data service. That's a function in our data service component. Okay, it returns a promise. When the promise resolves, we should hopefully have all the genres, all the rows from the genre table should have been converted into genre model objects. That's the work that we did in the last video. Okay, so here, then all we have to do is stringify those and send them in the response. So it's real simple. We can go res.json and then take all genres and pass that in. Okay. So pretty straightforward. The nice thing is all the complicated code is encapsulated away in this function. So it keeps our controller code kind of nice and easy to follow, nice and simple to follow. So when a request comes in to get all genres, we want to use the data service to get all the genres, and then we want to stringify it and send it in the response. Okay, kind of cool. All right. Okay, so at this point, I can actually make this request from the browser, and we can test it in the browser before we run our unit tests. but go ahead and save this file and then open up the terminal here, and let's go ahead and do npm run dev. Okay, it looks like our server is running on port 888, so I can go ahead and test this out and see what we get here. So I'm going to go over to a browser here and then open up a new browser tab here and try it out. Okay, looks like it's working. Very cool. You're seeing the whole process in play here with all the parts working together. So here we get our JSON response that represents all the genres that are in the database. Cool. I'm excited. All right. All right, now let's go ahead and run our unit tests. So we'll go back over to VS Code here. Whoops, right here, there it is. Okay, I'm gonna kill the server with Control C. We were running the dev server there. I could open up a new terminal if I wanted to. And now let's go ahead and run the tests here. So we'll go npm run test. That'll kick off all of our Jest unit tests. And now it's going to take a while because it's got to create the database, and it's very slow on this computer for some reason, probably because I've been experimenting with AI software that is just a resource hog, and I'm not shutting down that software. So maybe I should just shut that software down. By the way, it's called Olama, which is a really cool thing that lets you experiment with large language models. But that's the tool that's running on this computer that I think is really bogging it down. So I'm just talking here to fill space while the unit tests are running. And really the bulk of the time that it's taken to run the tests here is to recreate our test database. So hopefully any second here, there we go. Okay, all right, so all the tests pass. Okay, and again, we have this issue where the test terminal isn't closing, so we have to manually close it. So I can just press Control C here and then hit yes, and now the terminal is freed up again. That's an issue that I hope we can resolve in class, but I don't want to deal with it right now. Okay, again, here are the tests. So there's two tests really that we ran right here. We expected the status code to be 200, and that's what we sent in the response. And we expected there to be at least 25 rows in the response. Okay, so again, this super agent assumes that all the response bodies are JSON, and it will automatically parse the JSON into an array, in this case, an array of objects that represent genres. All right, cool. All right, now we're ready to move on to the other controller functions. Okay, before we actually move on to the next controller function, we should really test this in Postman too, just so that we can use Postman to make requests to our API. So what I'm going to do right here, I'm going to go ahead and run the dev server, npm run dev. Should say, so it's up and running on port 888, and then I'm going to go on over to Postman. Now I'm assuming that we've already played around with Postman in class right here. So I created a collection for the Chinook project that we're working on right here. If I open that up, now look at, these are all the requests that I set up for the whole project. So I've already done this. You can go ahead and create a collection. Actually, I might go ahead and export all this stuff for you so that you don't have to set all these up. But anyways, I tried to name these so I could find them here. Here's the one that we want to test here, genre get all. Okay, so I'm just going to click on that right here. And it's all set up and ready to go because I saved it into my collection. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit send and see what we get here. Okay, there we go. So it looks like what I expected. It looks like we're getting the data that we expect back in Postman. There's all the genres, and also we got a status code of 200. So it looks real good. Okay, so now you are going to have to create requests in Postman for everything, for all of your requests. So you can see here the ones that we'll be creating soon. Our genre get by ID, a post to the genre, that'll do an insert, a put to the genre, and then a delete to the genre as well. So those are going to be the requests that we're going to set up for the genres. So you'll have a total of 5 requests per table that we're working against here. Okay, back over here in VS Code, I'll just go ahead and kill the server like that, and then we'll move on to our next function in our controller. So let's see, it looks like the next one here is our get by ID handler. All right, so we can go ahead and comment out the dummy JSON response that we're sending, and we'll go ahead and add the real code here. Okay, let me just pop back over to our routes file, so the genre routes real quick, and I want to remind you that this one has a parameter. So right here, looks like I did these in a little bit different order, but it's not a big deal. There's the route that has an ID parameter, and we're going to have to extract that ID and pass it into our data service function, the get genre by ID here. So now we're ready to get started. Go on over to the genre controller here, and we can pick up right here where we left off, and it's going to look like this here. So we want to grab the genre that matches the ID param. So we'll do this const genre equals await, and then we'll call our get genre by ID that from our data access component, or our data service component, I should say. And here's where we're going to pass in that request parameter. So to do that, we can access the request object, and then inside of there it has a params object. And then that should have an ID property for the ID that we're extracting from the URL. Okay, so there it is. And then what we want to do here is check to make sure that we actually got a genre back. Remember, it's possible that this could return null. If a bogus ID is passed in, one that doesn't exist in the genre table, then we set this up to return null. Okay, so what we'll do right here is an if statement that checks to see if genre is truthy. So if it's null, that will end up being false. So there's my if statement. Okay, and then if we end up in that code block right there, we're all good to go, and we can take the response like that and call the status method, set the status to 200. That means it was success. And then we can also send the JSON in the response. So I'm doing some method chaining right here. And what we're going to do is send the genre like that. Okay, so that's if everything goes well. If the genre comes back as null, so our if statement will end up in an else block that we can put right here. So we'll do else, turn that into an if-else statement. And then in this case, I think what we need to return is a 404 status, meaning that we don't have that resource that you requested. So we'll take the response object and set the status to call the status method and pass in 404. That'll send a 404 status to the browser. And then we also do want to send some JSON. So I'm going to call the JSON method. I'm going to chain that right on here like that. And then we'll pass an object inside of there. So I'm going to put some curly braces. And then it's pretty traditional to make this object just have a message property. So I'll add a message property to it. So message colon. And then what I have in my notes here is I just put this failed resource not found. I don't know if that's the best approach, but that's what we'll be sending back to the browser. Okay, I'm going to put a semicolon at the end of that line, even though I don't have to. And we really should wrap all this code in a try-catch block too. So just in case, because if something goes wrong, if an error gets thrown, then it's going to crash the server. Okay, so what we want to do is catch the error and pass it into the next function so that our error handler can get it. So the last thing I'm going to do right here is wrap all this code that we just wrote inside a try-catch block. So I'm talking about from there down to there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and indent this, or I guess I'll put the try part in first here. Try, and then pair of curly braces, and then indent these lines of code like that. And right there, I'll close the try block and put my catch. Whoops. Ooh. Okay, and it looks like we've been calling that error object ERR, short for error, like that. And then what we'll want to do here is call the next handler in the pipeline and pass in the error, and that will get tossed to our error handler, and it will prevent the server from crashing when something goes wrong. Okay, I think we are ready to try this out. I'm looking at my notes, and I had a few other different ways that we could have done this code, but this is what I settled on. So, okay, so let's see. Let's try it out in the browser first, because GET requests are easy to do in the browser. So I'm going to go ahead and save the changes here. Run npm run dev. Okay, the server is up and running on port 888. I'm going to go over here, and I'm just going to take this and add a 1. So there's our ID param. We want the genre with the ID of 1. And I think I got what I was looking for. There it is. There's the response. I don't see the status code here, but we could do that, but we don't necessarily need to. Might as well just do this in Postman too. You're going to have, whoops, that's not Postman. Here's Postman. So you are going to have to set up all these requests in Postman. And one of the ways that I can grade you on the final project is to just do these requests right from here and just make sure that everything's working. Okay, and again, I might export all of these so that you don't have to recreate them. I'm still trying to decide if I should do that or not. It'd be good practice for you to do it, but it is kind of tedious. Anyways, I already set up the request that we want to do right here, which is genre get by ID. So I'm going to click on that, and you can see that it's set up as a GET request, and it looks like I'm checking for 26 here. Okay, I don't know if that exists in the database. That's the last one I did. I'm going to go ahead and send this request off and see what happens here. Okay, now look at that. I got my 404 and my status message. Okay, let me change this to one that I know is in the database, like 1. So I'm going to change that to a /1, and then I'm going to send the request. And there we go. I got what I wanted, and I got my status code of 200. So it looks like it's working in Postman. The last thing to do is to get the unit tests to work. So we'll go back over to our unit tests, which is genre API test.js, and we can remove the comment around these tests right here. So I'm going to go here to where the comments begin, and I'm just going to delete that. And then I want to scroll down to where that describe function call ends. And it's right there. And then I'm going to put the opening comment right below there. So I've effectively uncommented the tests for get genre by ID right here. Okay, let's take a look at these real quick here. It looks like I was fiddling around with these a bit out from my comments here. Okay, first of all, here is where we're actually sending the request through our super test agent. And it looks like we're requesting number 3 here. And then here we're expecting the response body to be this. So we expect to get an object that has an ID of 3 and a name of metal. And so that's our first test. If we don't get that, then the test is going to fail. Here we're expecting the status code to be 200. And then I just threw in some redundant stuff here. I don't know if I necessarily need this, because these two look like the things that we're just expecting that response, the body of the response, to have an ID property and a name property. So it looks like these two tests right here are doing the same thing as this one up here. Okay, let's go ahead and run the test real quick. Wait, is there more? There's more. Okay. The next set of tests is for checking to make sure that it returns the proper status code if there's a bogus ID. So here, when I send the request, I'm passing in a bogus ID for that ID param. And then here we're just checking to make sure that the status code is 404, meaning that that resource is not found on our server. Okay, and that looks like that's it. So those are the tests that we're running for when you want to get a genre by its ID. Go ahead and save it here. I didn't really change anything. I didn't know why I need to save, or what did I change? I don't know if I changed anything or not. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and kill the server running in the terminal with Control C here. and then I'm going to run the test. npm run test like that. Now, hopefully for you, it's not taking this long. I'll just pause the video. It should only take a few seconds, but I'm just going to pause the video anyways. Okay, so that took about a total of 20 seconds, I think. That's not too bad, but it's really annoying to have to wait that long, especially if you're running the tests a lot. But we did get them all to pass, so everything looks good, and we're ready to move on to the next function in our controller. So we checked all the boxes. We got the unit test to pass. We tried the GET request out in the browser, and we also did the request from Postman. So we're really testing well here. All right, let's go get started on the next controller function. So back in our controller file, we'll scroll on down here. So it looks like it's our insert handler. So this is going to handle post requests here. So I'm going to go ahead and comment out the dummy response that we have. And then here's what we're going to do here. I'll probably just start it with a try catch. I forgot that last time, but I know I'm going to use that. So I'm just going to start it off with a try catch block here. So there's my try block, and I'll add the catch, and we're calling that error object ERR like that. So I've got set up here. And let's see. So the first thing we want to do is take the body of the request that got sent to us and then convert that into a genre model object. Because remember, what we need to pass into our insert genre method in our data service component is a genre model object. Okay, so right here inside the try block, I want to do this. Const genre equals new genre. We're going to call the constructor for our genre model. Okay, and then what we're going to pass in is the body of the request. That's going to have it. Request.body. Okay, and now remember, the body of the request is actually a string, but Express is parsing it into an object for us. So that's kind of something that is kind of invisible to us. Express is actually taking the body and taking that JSON string and converting it into an object for us. Okay, and you'll see what we send when we do this in Postman in just a second here. You'll see how we set up the request and send the JSON string in the body. All right, so the next thing we do before we insert a genre, we want to make sure that it's valid. So the next thing we'll do is validate the model. So we can do it like this: const, and then our validate method returns two things. Is valid is what I call the first thing. That's is valid with an I like that. So that's going to be true or false, whether the model object is valid. And then an object that has error messages in it, so we can set it up like that. And then here we'll go ahead and take our genre model object and call the validate method. Whoops, like that. Okay, and then the next thing I have in here is an if statement where we check to see if it's valid. So here I said if is valid. Set up your if statement just like that. If is valid, then a pair of curly braces. Okay, and then what we'll do is we're going to call our insert genre function from the data service component. And what it returns is it should return the ID of the genre that just got inserted. So we're going to take our genre model and set its ID equal to what we get back from calling await insert genre. Okay, and then we're going to actually pass in our genre model. Okay, all right, so we pass in the model and then it returns an ID, and we go ahead and just assign that to the ID property of the model that we just passed in. Kind of weird, but it's fine, it works. Okay, if all goes well, we'll end up down on the next line here, and we can send the response. So here we'll take the response object, res dot, it will set the status code to 201. So that anything in the 200 range means it's a success, but when you're posting data and adding data to the server, we want to reply with a 201 because that means that something got created on the server. That's what a 201 status code is here. We can do method chaining here, and we can talk about how this is set up to do method chaining. Just let me know. That's kind of an interesting little experiment in programming, setting an object up so that you can do method chaining on it. But anyways, we can chain on the call to JSON. That's what we're going to send in the response right here. And then we're simply going to take that genre and send that back. Okay, so now what's different about the genre that we got and the genre that we're sending back? The difference is the one that we return in the response has the ID. So the one that we got didn't have an ID yet because it didn't get into the database. But by the time we run our insert genre, which does the SQL query, we'll have an ID. We attach it to the genre model, and then we take that and we send it right back with the ID in the response. All right, I'm going to add an else to this if statement right here. So we'll go else, and then here in this case, the genre model object did not validate. So what we want to do right here is to take the response and set the status code to 400, and I think that means that a status code of 400 indicates that you sent us a bad request. You sent us a genre model that was not valid. That's a bad request. So that's a 400 status code right there. And then we'll go ahead and send some JSON. So I'll call the JSON method with method chaining right there. We pass an object into that has a message property. This is what Amazon Web Services does, is a lot of the responses send an object that has a message property. So I'm kind of following along those lines. I've seen that in other places too. So here we can make this say failed, and then like something like invalid genre or something like that. Okay, and I don't know how much detail you want to put in your messages, because you don't really want to always give details. Sometimes the status code is enough. All right, finally, the last thing is in our catch block, we want to call the next function. So down in the catch block, we'll just call the next route handler, and we'll pass in the error that got thrown, and that will end up in our error handler back in app.js. Okay, so I'm going to try and fit the whole thing on here for you. So here it is, starting on my line 29, all the way down to line 43 here. And that's everything. Okay. All right. So you can pause the video and type that in if you want right now, if you haven't been doing it as I've been talking. But now the next thing we need to do is now we can't really do a post request from the browser. There's probably a way to do it, but I'm not sure of what it is. But we can test this in Postman, and then we'll run the unit tests for it. So let's try it out in Postman first. So go ahead and save your changes, Control S here, and then go back over to Postman. Now I do have this request already set up here. So there it is, post genre insert. I was careful to name all these requests so I could find these things when I'm looking for them. But there's the one we want to do right here. So you can see that this is set up as a post request, and there's the URL. We don't attach anything after /genres because when you're doing an insert, there is no ID anyways. But let's go ahead and, so that's the URL that we're going to send to. I do want to show you, if we click here on the body, I want to show you how to set the body up. So right here, you click on the body tab here, and then click the raw button. So this is the raw data that we're sending up. This is a JSON string right here. So you can type that in. And that means that we're sending up a genre or an object that represents a genre. And the only property that we have to deal with genres is the genre name. So I've added a name property and set it to K-pop there. Remember, we don't need an ID because it hasn't been inserted in the database. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and hit send here and see what we get back for the response. Says could not send request post bot. Okay, I'm going to pause the video and see what's going on here. Okay, it didn't take me long to realize that my server wasn't running. So I'm going to go ahead and run the server. All right, lots of parts here. Okay, so over here, I'm going to kill the test that's hanging in the terminal right now with Control C. And then I'm going to do npm run dev here to start the server. And then I'm going to go back over to Postman and try it again. So here I'll go ahead. Now I'm wondering, the other thing that we technically should do is set a header here. I don't know if this is required because we're kind of assuming that everything is coming to us as JSON strings, but technically what we should do is set a header here that sets the content type to JSON, application/JSON. I don't think I necessarily need that, but for some APIs, you do have to send the content type header so that it knows what format the data is coming in. But I think our API just assumes everything is JSON, so I don't think I need to worry about it. So there is our JSON string right there. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit send again, see what happens. Okay, there we go. It looks like it worked. So here's our status code 201. That's what we wanted, or that's what we designed it to do. And then there is the genre that got sent back in the body of the response. So like I said, this one has an ID there, which is what we just got from the database, and it looks like everything worked. If I looked in the database right now, the Chinook test database, I would expect to see this row in the genres table. I'm not going to do that because these videos are getting really long. But anyways, the next thing for us to do is to get the unit tests up and running. All right, so I'm going to go back over to VS Code here and then go to our test file, which is genre API test.js right here. And then I'm going to remove the comments for the post tests. So here we go. Here it is. You can just remove the opening comment there, cut that, and then scroll on down to the end of those post tests. So I'm just following that plumb line right there. And I tried to put comments to help you too. And then what I'll do is comment out or put that opening comment down there. So I've effectively just removed the comment for the test that we're interested in right now. That's better because then I don't like it when you get a ton of failing tests. It's really confusing to look at that in the output. Okay, so now here, let's take a look at these tests right here. Okay, so first of all, and now don't you know, I'm not the world's best unit tester, so I don't know if everything makes sense here, but these are the tests that I came up with. First of all, we were expecting a status code of 201, and actually there's more going on here than just a status code test right here. It looks like, so here's where we're checking. All right, we'll just go through this little by little here. I want to point out how you can send a post request with our super test agent. So right here, we take our super test agent and call the post method and set the URL to /genres. And then we chain on the send method right there. And inside of there, the parameter that we pass into the send method is what we're sending in the body. So in this case, we're sending, there's the name that we're sending for this new genre, some new genre for API test. When we tested it in Postman, we said the name was K-pop, but here we're just sending in something else. Anyways, so there's how we're simulating that. There's how we're doing the post request with our super test agent. Okay, we're gonna get the response back here. We want the status to be 201. We already saw that in Postman. We expect the response body to have an ID, but I wasn't sure what ID it would be. So I didn't make a test that actually checks what the ID property is. We're just checking to make sure it has an ID property. And we also expect it to have a name property, which should be the same thing as what we sent. Okay, so those are the tests those are the three little tests that we're running there. Yeah, I don't know if I like this description here. Okay, here we're checking to make sure that it returns a status code of 400 if the genre is not valid. So look at what I did here. I set up the post request right down here, and I sent something that has an empty string for a name. Okay, so that's not gonna pass our validate method. And in that case, we designed our code to return a status code of 400, and that means bad request. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and run these here and see what we get. So I'm gonna go ahead and save the changes, and then here I'll kill the server that we had running, and I'll go ahead and run the tests. And this is taking about like 20 or 25 seconds, so I'm just going to pause the video because you probably don't want to sit here and listen to me talk. Okay, yep, about 20 seconds or so, which is longer than it should be. It should be just a few seconds, but let's see what we got here. Okay, looks like everything's passing, so we're all green, all good to go. All right, what do we have next here? We have the put and the delete, so that's what we have coming up here. All right, so let's go on over to our controller and scroll on down to the update handler. So those are going to be for handling put requests. Go ahead and remove the comment out our dummy response right there, like that. And then let's go ahead and add the code here. I think what I'll do is just cut and paste it, and you guys can copy it, and we'll that might make the video not quite so long. Okay. Actually, that's not going to work so well because this one gets kind of long, and then I'd have to scroll, and it gets to be kind of confusing to see it. So what I did is I just set up the try catch block here, and then we'll work our way through this one. So this has some things that we didn't have to deal with before. Okay, so go ahead and set up the try catch block, and then inside the try block. Now, here's one thing that we have to deal with put requests. When you send the JSON string in the body, it's the model object is going to have an ID in it, but APIs ignore that. What they do is they check they know which genre in this case to update based on the ID that's in the URL. Let me show you here. So I'm going to actually pop over to Postman and show you the post request for genre. I'm sorry, the put request. So there's the put request. Okay. Now look at the URL that I'm sending here. So it's got a /1. That means that we're updating the genre with the ID of 1. So that's how it knows what genre to update in the URL. But if I click here on the body, you can see that if we're doing an update, we've got an ID in our genre. Okay. So what I was thinking is, what happens if this ID is not the same as this ID that's been sent in the body? Then something's wrong, okay? So if that occurs, I'm checking for that because we need to all be defensive programmers. You know, anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and we need to account for it in our code. That's defensive programming. So what I have here back in our controller inside the try catch block here is an if statement to check for that. So here, set up an if statement, okay, and we will be turning that into an if-else statement, so you can go ahead and put the else block in right now. Okay, there we go. And now here's what I've got for the Boolean expression of the if statement. We want to check to make sure that the parameter that is appended to the URL is the same as the one that got sent in the body. So we can go rec.params.id. We want to make sure that that's double equal to. I probably should use triple equal to. I'm not going to though, just because my notes have double equal. And then we want to make sure that that's the same as the request req.body.id. Okay, so if those two match, then we should be good to go. So why don't we go ahead and see, let's just fill in the else block here first, okay? All right, so if they don't match, what we're gonna do is take the response and send a status of 400. That means that that was an invalid request that you sent. And then we're gonna chain on a JSON message. So we'll chain on the call to the JSON method here, and then put curly braces inside of those parentheses, and I'm putting a semicolon there, and then we'll put a message property inside of those curly braces, and then the message is going to be failed ID mismatch. That's what I came up with. I don't know. Now we could test these messages that we're sending. We could test them in our unit tests, but I didn't want to go that far. Okay, but ideally you would test, you know, any error messages that are generated. Okay, so that's what we're going to do if the parameters don't match. So let's move into the if block right here. Okay, all right, so the first thing we're going to do is take the body of the request and turn it into a genre model object. So we'll go const genre equals new genre. We're calling the constructor for our model here. and then we can pass in the body of the request. So rec.body, okay, like that. And then the next thing we want to do is validate it to make sure that it's valid. So we'll set that up like this: const square brackets is valid and errors. So those are the two things that we get back inside the array that's returned from our validate method. And we're going to set that equal to genre.validate. Okay, and then the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to check to make sure it's valid. So I've got nested if statements about to happen right here. And there's probably other ways we could write this code to make it more concise, but I just wanted to stick with something that everybody's familiar with. But anyways, I'm going to start an if statement right here. If, pair of parentheses, pair of curly braces, split those curlies apart. And then here we want to check the is valid variable. If it's valid, then we're good to go. And here's what we can do here. We'll go ahead and do the update against the database. So I did const result. We're going to get a result from the database, and that's going to be equal to await and then update genre. And then we take the genre model and pass it in. Okay, so now here's where we're calling our data service function to do updates in our data service component. Okay, and then if everything went well, we expect this result to be true. That's what we're returning on a successful update. So what I have here is another if statement. I don't know, these nested if statements get a little bit messy, and like I said, there's probably a better way to do this, but I've got another if statement in here, so you got to pay real close attention to what's going on here. So I'm going to do if, and then set the table, if, pair of parentheses, pair of curly braces. Make sure you're indenting everything properly, otherwise it gets to be real messy. And we're checking, what I have here is if result is triple equal to true, because we know we designed that update genre function to return true. So I'm checking it with the strict equality operator, the triple equal sign. Then what we can do is send the response back. So we can do res.status, and we'll send a 200 status code. That means everything worked right here. And then we'll attach some JSON. And now I don't know if we needed to send a JSON message or not. When you do an update, when you send an update to an API, you really don't care about anything other than a status code of 200. That just means that your update worked. Whatever you sent, it worked, and you're not expecting anything back. But I'm just kind of following the same pattern that we've been doing here. I'm going to pass an object in here with a message property, and we're going to make it say success. Okay, I've seen that a lot on AWS, by the way. They send success messages along with the status code. All right, let's add an else to this if statement. So I'm going to move down a line and type in else and a pair of curly braces like that. And in that case, that means that when we tried to update the database by calling this, it didn't return true. Okay, so something went wrong. All right, so in that case, it could be a database error. We're not really sure, but what I decided to do here is res.status, and I don't know if this is all exactly correct. You never really know until you actually have it running in production for a while, and you learn if your decisions were sound or not in hindsight. Okay, so right here, the JSON message that we're going to send is, so message failed to update is what I put in here. Failed to update. Okay. Oh, a lot of work here. Okay, so now that takes us back to this if statement where we're checking to see if it's valid. We need to put an else onto that, because what if the model object is not valid? So I'm going to go down to here. Luckily, I indent my code properly so I can find the closing curly brace, and I'm going to add an else statement here. I'd be curious to hear what you guys have to say. Like, are there better ways to write this code than what I'm doing here? It's getting a little bit messy, And maybe what we'll do is put comments. It's not a bad idea to comment this. Even though the video is getting super long, it's not a bad idea to comment this code out so that when we look at it, we can understand it. So anyways, in this else block, we're going to send a status code of, let's see, a status code of 400 and a JSON message. So there we go. I got my curly braces inside those parentheses, and we're going to set the message property of that object to be failed invalid. Okay, there we go. And are we done? I think we're actually done. Okay, now before we move on, I'm just going to add comments here. So I was almost able to fit the whole thing in here. Maybe if I close the terminal. Here we go. So I'm just going to go ahead and add comments, and I'll do that without recording. Okay, so I added a few comments, not a big deal, and I actually caught an error that I made here too. Here, where if the update to the database fails, I'm sending a good message right here, failed to update, but I don't want to send a status code of 200. What I really think I want to send is a status code of 500. Okay. That indicates that there was an error on the server. So if the database was down, or I don't know. So anyways, that's a bug that I wrote in the code before. Okay, so I just added a few comments right here. First of all, we want to make sure that the ID in the body matches the ID in the URL. We talked about that. We want to make sure that the genre has valid data in it. So what we do is we take the data from the body and pass that into the constructor over here for the genre class, our model object. And then we want to check to make sure it's valid. And then the other thing I did here is we want to make sure that when we call this function right here, that it returns true. So those are the comments that I added. Just those three. I don't know if those are helpful or not, but whatever. That's what's going on right here. That's the nastiest one, and we've only got one left. Okay, so now I thought the last video was the longest one I ever made. This one's going to be the longest one I ever made. Okay, let's go ahead and save the changes here. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the terminal and run the dev server. So I'm going to do Control-C down here, and then do npm run dev. Okay, it's not easy to test put requests in the browser, so I'm going to go right over to Postman. Here we go. Here's Postman. Here is the put request. So I click on it. It's in my Chinook dev collection that I created right here. And it looks like we're going to try to update the genre with the ID of 1. And we're going to set its name. Now here, I think we're messing with trouble right here, because we might have, I hope this doesn't, well, we're not running our unit tests right now. So, okay, I'm worried about stepping on unit tests. I'm going to go ahead and hit send here, see what happens. Okay, I got a response of success, status code of 200. That's what I expected. And by the way, I just want to point out that when these requests go off from Postman, they're not affecting the test database. They're affecting just the regular Chinook database that we're using for development. So try not to let that confuse you. When we're testing in Postman against our dev server is running against the Chinook database. When we run the unit tests are running against the Chinook test database. We wanted to keep those separate because the unit tests require the database to be in a state that we know about. Okay, you can ask me about that in class if you want. Finally, the last thing is to check out the unit tests. So go back over to VS Code and go to the genre API test file right here, and let's see what we got. So here, if you scroll down a bit, you want to remove that opening comment for the put tests. And you can see right here, I put helpful messages in my describe function call. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that opening comment and then follow the plumb line down to where that describe ends. And there's my comment, end of put genre. So here I'll paste in that opening comment, and now I've effectively remove the comments around the put tests. Okay, let's just take a look at these real quick here. Okay, so I guess when everything goes right, it should return a status code of 200. Okay, and I did make a note here that now we could be dealing with some issues right here, because if another test updates the same row in the database, this test could interfere with it. And that's all because we don't know the order that these tests run in. So that's a problem that we probably should look into more. But anyways, we can talk about that in class too. All right, here's what I did is I just created an ID of the row that we want to update. And then I took our session agent and called the put method. That's going to send a put request for us. And then there's where I concatenated that ID to update there. And then so I put the ID to update in the URL and in the body. So I just wanted to make sure we were sending in the proper ID in both places. And then it looks like, I don't know if this update is actually changing anything. I'm not really sure what's in the database. We'd have to look. Okay, so that's what we're sending in the body, what we pass into the send method here. And then we expect the response to be a status code of 200. Okay, we could check the body of the response to check those messages that we're sending, but I didn't want to go that far. Okay, so we're just checking for a status code of 200 when we're making a valid request. Okay, so that's that one right there. Okay, it should return 400 if the genre is not valid. So here I set the ID to 1. And why? Oh, okay. So here I'm not fiddling with the IDs, but what's not valid here is the name that I'm sending. So that's invalid data that we're sending in the body of the response of the request. Okay, so in that case, we expect a status code of 400, which indicates that it's an invalid request. All right, here again, now this one I was checking to see if the URL ID matches the ID in the body. So here is the ID that I'm appending to the URL. But look here, the ID that I'm sending in the body is 2. And so that's a mismatch. And in that case, we expect the status code to be 400, which means that it's an invalid request. Okay, so we could do a lot more tests, and we should in a real project, but this is real tedious and we don't have enough time for all that. So I'm going to go ahead and save whatever changes I made right here. And then I'm going to kill the server and run the tests. So down here, I'll do Control-C, hit yes, and then npm run test, pause the video. Okay, so we're at 32 passing tests. So the tests are really piling up right here, but the update was a little more complicated. And that means that the testing is more complicated. There's more things that you have to test when your functions are more complicated. That's why you want to write functions that are super simple, because they're much easier to test. All right, last one is the delete. Oh my gosh, I'm getting tired, but we're almost done here. The delete should be pretty straightforward compared to what we just did. So let's go back over to our controller file and then scroll on down here to the delete and comment out our dummy response right there. And here's what we want to put in here. I think I can just paste this in. Let me see what I got in my notes. Okay, here we go. I pasted in, everything's in the try catch block right here. So we'll just walk through this code. You can go ahead and set this up however you want here. So we got our try catch, and if an error occurs, we want to bounce that down the HTTP pipeline, and our error handler will pick it up. Okay. All right. So inside the try, we are going to take the ID parameter. So for deletes, what APIs look for is the ID and the URL. So we're going to extract that as a request parameter right there. And that's what we pass into our delete, the ID of the genre that we want to delete. Okay. If the delete is successful, we expect the result to be true here. And so in that case, we send a status of 200 and a message of success. Okay. And if it doesn't return true, then something went wrong. And I guess what looks like what I did here is I just assumed that this was an invalid request. I'm saying that because I'm seeing that I sent a status code of 400. Now that might not be exactly true because it could be a database error. In that case, that should be a status code of 500, meaning that there's a database server error. Okay, whatever. We'll just leave it how it is and see how it goes here. Okay, so that's everything. That's one of the easier ones, I guess. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then go on over to Postman and try it out in Postman here. Okay, now remember again, Postman, when you run these tests, it's going against the dev server. So I guess I better start the dev server. Is it started? No, it's not. I'm going to kill the tests, start the dev server with npm run dev. Okay, we're up and running. I can go back over to Postman here. I have the delete request set up here. Where is it? Genre delete. Okay. You can see that I've got it set up as a delete request. We don't have to send anything in the body because the ID to delete is right there. Okay. Okay, I guess we're deleting now this is getting deleted from the Chinook database, not the test one, but let's just see what happens. I don't know if this is going to work. Cannot delete. Okay, so it won't let me look at this. Very interesting. Did we crash the server? No, we shouldn't have crashed the server. Okay, this is interesting. The server's still running, I can see, but what happened is we got an error when we tried to run our delete here. And what happened is we caught the error in our catch block and it got bounced to our error handler. Okay, let me go back to the error handler here. So here's the error handler. Sometimes we can attach a status code to the error before we kick it down the chain with next, but we didn't do that. So this is setting the status code to 500, meaning that there's a server error. Okay. Now, if we were in production, we would get a status code of 500 and we would get a message of just there has been an error. But we are not running in production. So what we got here, what you saw in Postman was this, which has all the details of the error. So I dumped out the error message and the stack trace. Okay, so that can be helpful when you're debugging. Okay, let's take a look at that response in Postman. Okay, and I can see here it's a database error and it's a foreign key constraint. Okay, so we can't delete the genre with the ID of 1 because of a foreign key constraint. Something's using that ID in another table. All right, very interesting. I wonder if there's one we can delete. Let's see here. All right, so over here, I need to remember in Postman, our requests, our SQL queries are running against the Chinook database. Let's see what we have in there. I don't know which one we can delete. We might not be able to delete any of these. Maybe what we need to do is an insert. Let's do an insert. So we'll send a post request and then we'll delete that one. I guess that's what we'll have to do. Okay, so I'm going to go back over to the post genre right there. Oh, we should be able to delete this one, our K-pop one. That had an ID of 26. Let's try and delete that one. Okay, so I'll go back over to my delete genre, and then I'm going to set the ID here to 26, and then hit send, and it was successful. Okay, so interesting. That's interesting that happened, but that's good for us to see that. So you know, foreign key constraints could throw off your deletes. All right, now let's take a look at the unit tests. So, and then we're done. Okay, so back over here, go to the test file, genre API test, remove the comment around the delete test. So there's the opening one, and now I can scroll down and just remove the closing one because that's the last group of tests here. And then let's run through these here. Okay, so look at what I did here. I did a post first so that we can get an ID so that we can delete one. So that's interesting. So part of this test here is to insert one first, get the ID, and then use that ID for the delete. So here, yeah, look at, I called that pre-response because that's going to be our first request. So there's our pre-response, and I get the ID from the body of the response. And then we concatenate that onto the URL for our delete request, and then we expect a status code of 200 here. Okay, now what we expect if the ID is not valid, I think we expect a 400 status code. Is that how we programmed it to do it? But anyways, those are the tests. Those are the only tests that we have in here. So I'm going to go ahead and save these, even though I didn't make any changes. And I think we're ready to run it. So Control C, kill the dev server, npm run test, wait for a minute. All right, there we go. What do we got? Okay, everything's passing. I'm seeing all green. So now we're up to 34 tests. All right, so boy, that was a lot of work. And you know what? We have to repeat this for all the other tables that we're working with. But I have ideas about ways we can kind of automate this process so we don't have to type everything in again. We'll see how that goes. All right, so that's it. That's the whole shebang right there. That's how we're going to set up this API. From here, all we have to do is add these folders for all of the other tables that we're working with here. So it's going to be a lot of work, a lot of rinse and repeat. Maybe we can automate the process. I've got some thoughts on that, but there you go. You've seen the whole cycle. Other than setting up all the routes and controllers and models for all the other tables, the only other thing we have to do is work authentication into this project. So that's what we'll be working on shortly here. But in the meantime, you can be working on all the other tables that we need to work against. All right, I need to go to bed, and it's only 5:30 in the evening.